What's up, everyone? Welcome back to day 3 of my 4-day draft recap and reaction series. We are now officially halfway through. Yesterday, we did the AFC West and the NFC East, so we went all through that kind of Daniel Jones, Dwayne Haskins drama in the NFC East, as well as that wild Cleveland Ferrell pick in the top 5 for Oakland in the AFC West. A lot of really strong draft classes in both of those divisions. Equally strong draft classes to me in today's topics, the AFC North and the NFC South. So let's start out with the AFC North and the division winners from last year in the AFC North, the Baltimore Ravens. When I was doing my mock draft, a week ago, about a week and a half ago, my number one goal when I was kind of posing as the Ravens GM was help Lamar Jackson. That's all I wanted them to do was help Lamar, and boy, did they. I mean, good Lord, this offense, it's just speed on speed on speed now. I really like the Mark Ingram signing they had in the offseason, back in March. They got him from the Saints to be their new power back. I think he's an upgrade over the Gus Bus. Edwards, he's a fine player, but to me, Ingram is an upgrade both as a runner, a receiver, a pass protector. Like, that is just an overall upgrade to their run game. And then you bring in Marquise Brown out of Oklahoma, who's basically just Deshaun Jackson 2.0, Will Fuller 2.0, just an extremely dangerous deep threat who you can also get involved maybe a little bit in the run game if you're kind of running like a sweep with him or an end around with him, or in the screen game, he's great after the catch. You want to run bubbles to him out of the slot, whatever you want to do. He's not just a deep threat. He's not just a gadget player. He's both, honestly. His speed works laterally or vertically. He's really just kind of the definition of a playmaker. He can get 4 catches a game and still put up 80 to 100 yards and a touchdown. He's that kind of player. So I really love that addition. I did have DK Metcalf graded higher than Brown. I felt like he was a little bit more versatile, do a little bit more work in the red zone. He's more physical as a true X receiver, but that doesn't mean I don't like the Brown pick. I feel like he fits what they needed in that offense, which is just flat out speed and help for Lamar. They came back and got Boykin in the late third. Again, just speed, size, giving Lamar some sort of verticality to the offense that they didn't have last year outside of John Brown. Not that Brown's a bad player, but I feel like Marquise Brown is a better version of John Brown. So that to me was an upgrade there. And then Boykin, he gives him more of that size. Maybe throw a little bit more back shoulder fades to him than you would do to Marquise because he can box people out. Maybe throw a little bit more red zone work his way. He doesn't play as fast as his time speed, but that doesn't mean he's slow. I think on tape he plays as like a 4-5 kind of guy, more of a long strider, build up speed kind of guy. But as a late third round value, totally love that pick. I think his upside is tremendous. They got Justice Hill in the 4th, again, kind of sticking with the theme of helping out their quarterback, giving him speed to work with. And Hill is a perfect complement to Ingram, to me. When I was comparing him, keep in mind, I had him as like a top 3 running back in this class, so getting him in the 4th round is a tremendous value. When I was comparing him coming out, I compared him to like a more juiced up Kenyon Drake. Very similar build, great speed. His jump cut is amazing. He can make you miss. Has versatility as a receiver. You can kind of maybe put him in the slot, give him some slot work, match up on linebackers, and just roast them. But he's faster than Drake. He's more explosive than Drake, which is saying something because Kenyon is very fast and very explosive, but Justice Hill is just a more twitched up version. So getting him in the early 4th round was great. So between Brown, Boykin, and Hill, all of a sudden the Ravens offense has more weapons than they've had, more young weapons, I should say, that they've had in a very long time, and they're all very high upside. So if I was going to help Lamar out, they definitely did. Circling back a little bit to the defense, they got Jalen Ferguson in the 3rd round. And when I look at Ferguson, I can't imagine a more Ravens-ish edge rusher in this whole class than Jalen Ferguson. He's not the most athletically gifted guy, but he plays his ass off. He's versatile, and he can line up in a 2-point, 3-point, 4-point stance, put him anywhere you want to on the field. He's really good on stunts. He kind of understands that it's not just about hitting a gap, it's about how you hit a gap, moving guards out of the way, opening up lanes for people to come in behind you. Very well coached pass rusher. So it was the most Ravens edge rusher in this class because they've never really had, stud athletes on the outside who are just going to whip ass one-on-one. Like that's That's not how they rush the passer. They rush the passer in waves. They rush the passer as a group. It's a lot of stunts, a lot of blitzes, a lot of different kind of confusing looks that they throw at quarterbacks. And Ferguson fits that mold. He's versatile, he's strong, plays his ass off, and he's got good technique. That's a Raven to me. So love that pick for them. They got Powers in the 4th round. Ben Powers out of Oklahoma. He's the 5th guy to be drafted off that 2017 Oklahoma line. He's joining his old teammate Orlando Brown in Baltimore. Gives them really much needed guard depth. I think you can maybe have him as a swing guard. As a rookie, learning a little bit from Marshall Yanda, one of the best to ever do it. He's going to end up in the Hall of Fame, in my opinion. So very few people that are better for him to learn from than Marshall Yanda. Great pick. I love that one. The Amon Marshall pick might have been a little bit early for me in the late 4th. I think he might be kind of a candidate to convert to safety. So maybe if they're thinking, okay, we got to plan ahead for Tony Jefferson, or maybe we're looking for a new free safety. Marshall's a very physical outside corner prospect, but again, in terms of speed, explosiveness, fluidity, I think he might be a better fit as like a nickel safety. So, you can try him at corner. Again, he's really physical. He's got the size to play on the boundary. You can try him there first, see how he works out, but I do think eventually he's going to convert to safety. Again, not saying that means he's a lesser DB prospect. I think that's just probably where he'll be a better player. And looking at the 5th round, they got Dalen Mack, who went a little bit later than I thought. I think if you flip the Marshall and the Mack picks, those values aligned a little bit more with where I thought they were going to go. He came in as a very highly touted prospect at A&M. Maybe didn't quite live up to the billing of when he arrived in College Station, but he's still very athletic. I think you could put him as either like a cock nose or a 3 technique, just another big body they've got in the middle of that defense, which they've got plenty of them, and he's just one more huge frame to add into that rotation in the middle. So I think he fits their scheme very well in terms of his versatility and his athleticism inside. Weirdly enough, I always feel like the best athletes on the Ravens defense are inside, not outside, and Mack kind of fits in with that theme. So again, he's another perfect fit for the Ravens culturally and philosophically. So I can't knock the pick there. Trace McSorley, he was their last pick late in the 6th. This one was very intriguing to me, and apparently I didn't even see it. Somebody mentioned to me on Twitter that my theory was already kind of confirmed by the Ravens themselves, that the reason why they drafted Trace McSorley is solely because of what Taysom Hill did to them last year. Hill had more touches against the Ravens than at any other point in the season. He had, I think, 5 carries, maybe it might have been 6 carries. And they constantly went for it on 4th down against that really good Ravens defense. They went for it on 4th down like 4 times in the opening drive. And Hill got a lot of work for them on those short yardage situations, the 4th down situations in the red zone. Because he kind of threw a look at them that they hadn't seen before. And the Saints had a lot of success. They had like an 80% conversion rate on 4th down. So I think they looked at that. They looked at the Saints, who beat them in Baltimore. It was a huge game, arguably the best game I saw all of last year. It was highly entertaining from start to finish. If you have Game Pass, I really recommend you go back and watch it because it was a great game. But anyway, getting back to McSorley, I think they looked at what Hill did to them, the versatility he gave them on those big money downs, and said, we got to get a guy like that. We got to get somebody who can put in the slot, who, maybe we can throw in there on like 2 quarterback looks, or, if we need a 4th and 2 and we don't want to be predictable, we throw Trace out there and we have a play that we designed just for that week. That's how the Saints use Taysom Hill. They design plays specifically for him for big situations. And it worked. It worked against that great Baltimore defense in Baltimore. So I think they looked at that and they said, we got to get that kind of guy. They drafted Trace, who can be a 3rd string quarterback for them and just in general an offensive weapon. And when I look at the makeup of their offense now, I think we're going to see situations where, we've got, I guess you could call it a 4 wide receiver set, where you put Trace in the slot, Marquise in the other slot. You're running like an end around or a sweep or something with Marquise, and he pitches the ball back to Trace, and you got Lamar sneaking out on a wheel route down the boundary, and and Trace throws a bomb and he's wide open, and we see that 4.3 speed from Lamar show up, and it's a huge play and nobody sees it coming. But that's the kind of stuff I expect out of this offense now because of how they drafted. They've got a lot of versatility, they got a lot of speed, and I think we're going to see a lot of weird shit from them. Like you can't have this makeup of talent and not have really crazy, weird, and oddly effective play designs. It would be a disservice to this offense if they didn't have that Saints-like play design now, because they can absolutely get away with it. Like they're one of the few teams who I think can get away with that kind of stuff now, in addition to New Orleans. So I'm really fascinated to see what they come out with, not just in their quote-unquote normal offense, now that they have Brown and Boykin and Hill to go with the tight ends that they've already got on the roster. They have a really good and deep tight end core. And of course Ingram that I mentioned earlier. So I'm excited to see what their normal offense is, and I'm excited to see what their gadget kind of trick play weird shit offense is. I think they're going to be two very different packages that intermingle every single week, and it's going to be fun. So overall, I'm really in love with this Ravens class. I think they knocked it out of the park. You can argue that maybe they should have taken Metcalf in the first round if you had Metcalf as the number one receiver, but Marquise is still a really, really tremendous player. So I love what Baltimore did. I think they're positioning themselves well to compete for the AFC North title again next year. And I think those two games against the Browns, I think, are going to be critical now, because, to be honest, the division's probably going to come down to those two teams, especially after seeing how they drafted. Should be a hell of a game. So I'm pumped for that. Let's move on now to the Steelers, who finished second in the division last year, who... people are saying, okay, the Steelers, after losing Bell and after losing Brown, they're probably not going to be playoff contenders. I don't necessarily believe that. I don't think that, losing Brown and losing Bell is going to doom them. To me, the real problem they have isn't losing player talent, it's losing coaching talent. When we look at how they lost Mike Munchak to Denver this past offseason, that was probably the biggest blow to the entire team in the whole offseason, and they've had a lot of big blows. Munchak was, to me, the reason why we saw the Steelers' offensive line be among the best in the league, if not the best in the league, over the past few seasons. Taking undrafted free agent talents, late round free agent talents, or late round picks and turning them into Pro Bowl caliber players. That was Mike Munchak. It's the same kind of thing that we see with Dante Scarnecchia with New England, where they don't necessarily always have to invest high round picks into offensive linemen because they know that Dante's going to turn them into Pro Bowl caliber players anyway. Same thing with the Steelers, and he's gone now. So that's going to affect the run game, and it's going to affect the pass game. And even though, I know that he's already kind of developed those players, like, you can't just lose an offensive line coach and expect the offensive line to be fine, especially when that offensive line coach is one of the three best in the whole league, if not the best, if we're being 100% honest. It's either between him or Scarnecchia, in my opinion. So that was a huge blow to them. Like, when you look at their 7th round pick, Derwin Gray, huge frame, not the most athletically gifted, but he's got size, he's got length. Derwin Gray is the kind of tackle that Munchak would have developed into a starting caliber tackle. And I just don't think they're going to be able to do that now because they lost their best assistant coach. It was Denver's gain, but it's going to be hard to overcome that. In regards to the actual draft itself, I'm totally fine with Devin Bush in the first round. I don't know if I would have given up draft capital to go trade up for him. I had him falling all the way to 25 in my mock draft, but that doesn't mean that I don't think he's a explosive athlete, a first round caliber player. The talent fits a 10 to 15 range kind of pick. He's a fantastic athlete. He's got sideline to sideline speed. He can cover. He can blitz. And they feel like, linebacker was one of the thinner positions in this draft. So if they missed out on Bush, they wouldn't be able to get one at all. I understand the mentality about it. Again, I don't know if I would have traded up for him, but I understand why they did it, so I'm not going to knock it that much. In terms of the actual fit of the player into the defense, he's a perfect fit. He's the Ryan Shazier replacement that they've been trying to find for 2 seasons now. So I think you can probably pencil in Bush as, at the very minimum, a defensive rookie of the year kind of candidate, because I think he's going to get a ton of tackles. He's going to get a ton of passes defensed and sacks and all that kind of stuff. He's going to be a highly productive player. I did feel like they needed corner help more, but the fact that they got Justin Lane in the late third round, that totally made up for it in my eyes. I think Justin Lane was a very undervalued corner. You can play him on the outside from day one. He's a scheme fit for them because they certainly liked a lot of man coverage last year, and he can play man. Very good feet, very fluid hips. He's got the size, he's got the speed. So while, again, I kind of hope that they went corner in the first round, the fact that they still got Lane in the third round is totally fine with me. Overall, the Bush and Lane combination is about as good as they could hope to get out of the first 3 picks. Not to mention the Deontay Johnson pick in the early third round. Might have been a little bit early for him, but he's got talent, and obviously they needed receiver depth after Antonio left for Oakland. So, again, I'm perfectly fine with that. At the very least, I wanted them to get a linebacker and a corner out of the first 3 picks, and they got 2 of the best ones out of the first 3 picks. So, really overall good job by them. The Benny Snell pick in the late 4th, very sneaky value. He and James Conner are essentially the same guy in that they're not going to shake tackles. They're not going to run around them. They're just going to run through dudes. So I think if you plan on 30 to 35 rushing attempts a game at a minimum, ideally 20 for Conner, 10 for Snell, and just grind defenses down, kind of get away from the pass-happy Steelers that we've seen, over the last 5 or 6 years, and really kind of get more back to their roots with Bus and everything like that, and just grind teams down, throw it to Juju off play action, maybe get James Washington involved on deep balls, and really become that hard-nosed, run the ball, play defense, take your shots off play action kind of team. I think they can win a lot of games that way. I feel like even though they had super explosive offenses and they put up a lot of points on the board, they didn't really win much when they were so offensive-centric, where it was just, we're going to have Ben, we're going to have Bell, we're going to have Brown, we're going to have Juju, and we're going to throw the ball, 40 times a game. Again, they put up a whole bunch of stats, but they never actually really won that way. So I feel like if they get back to their roots, run the hell out of the ball, play defense, they're going to be a better team. Again, I wish they didn't lose Munchak because that was probably the biggest blow they suffered out of anything this offseason, but overall, they're still, in my opinion, they're okay. The Sutton Smith pick in the 6th, and then the Ulysses Gilbert pick also later in the 6th, to me, that was just shoring up special teams. They're 2 undersized linebacker prospects, not as big as Bush. Bush I think has like 10 pounds on Gilbert, because Bush played I think close to 235, 240, and Gilbert played at 225, something like that. Sutton Smith also, he was actually used more of a pass rusher at Northern Illinois. I don't think he's got the size to be a pass rusher in the pros, but I think if you put him as kind of like a roving will linebacker that you can pair up with Bush on passing downs and have him use his pass rushing skills as like a blitzer from the second level, taking on running backs, that kind of stuff, like he can be effective for you. He can be a good piece for you. At the very least, I think he'll be a special teams contributor. Bugs, he probably has a chance to make the team as more of like a rotational run-stopping 5 technique or 3 technique, however they want to play him. He can play anything from probably a cock nose to a 5 technique. Just another big, solid, strong body you put in the middle as that rotational run stopper. So overall, I'm actually a pretty big fan of this class. Again, the trade up for Bush bothered me a little bit, but the talent fit the value, so it wasn't that big of a deal. They still got linebacker help. They still got corner help. They got receiver help. They got defensive tackle help. They got a developmental offensive tackle. They addressed a lot of things that they needed to address in this class. Do I think that they'll challenge for the division crown? I mean, it's the Steelers, so I can't really rule them out. Personally, I feel like Baltimore and Cleveland are at a better position than Pittsburgh right now, but anything's possible when you got Mike Tomlin as head coach, Ben Roethlisberger as your quarterback, and even after Brown and Bell left, they've still got a lot of talent on offense, and they've still got a lot of talent on defense. It's not like the cupboard's bare here, so I don't know, again, if they'll make the playoffs, but I don't think they're going to be a bad team. I think they're going to be a wild card contender all the way up to week 17. And by the way, in Week 17, they play Baltimore. So that game very well could determine who goes to the playoffs, especially if Cleveland's leading the division, which I think they very well can lead the division. So AFC North, ultra competitive division as usual. And speaking of the Browns, I've mentioned them, twice now, talking about the Ravens and the Steelers. Might as well go over their draft class as a whole as well. The Greedy Williams pick in the second round, a lot of people thought that, he wasn't going to slip out of the first. I was not one of them. I never had him pegged as a first round pick anyway, and I think getting him in the mid-second is proper value. People kept asking me, why do I hate Greedy? I don't hate Greedy. I had him valued as a mid-second round pick, and that's where he went. So, clearly a lot of GMs agreed with me on that one. If you're a boundary corner and you're really a disinterested tackler and you're not super physical at stopping inside releases from big receivers, yeah, you're probably going to slip out of the first round. I know he's very explosive. I know he's very fast, but he's also very light to the point where I think a stiff breeze could carry him away. And again, he's just a very disinterested. He's not a physical tackler. And that to me kind of makes him a little bit of a one-dimensional player. Can he bulk up in the league? Yeah, but that also might affect his best trait, which is his speed and explosiveness, which then affects his ball skills. So I wasn't shocked that he went in the second round. I do think that it was a fine pick for Cleveland because he's a developmental corner. I think they need to kind of get some toughness into him, and he can learn to stop these inside breaks because that was his biggest weakness. People said, oh, he shut down DK Metcalf, who's a big physical receiver, but the one time Metcalf actually broke inside, I mean, he whooped Greedy on that route. He wasn't targeted, but he still kicked his ass because Greedy can't stop inside breaks. So, when DK's running go routes down the boundary all day and it's, 4-3 speed against 4-3 speed, yeah, of course, Greedy's going to be at home and he's going to shut that down because that's the one thing he's good at shutting down. But, if you're expecting Greedy to line up in week 1 and shut down all these super physical X receivers as a press corner, he's going up against, DeAndre Hopkins, or let's throw Allen Robinson in there, Keenan Allen, all these guys that line up on the line of scrimmage and relish contact. They're going to kill Greedy until he learns to give them contact right back. Like that's my big problem with him. It's not physical skill set. It's not technique. I just want him to play tougher because the best corners play tougher. So if the Browns can get that toughness out of him, great pick. He's going to very much outperform his draft selection, but it is contingent on them toughening him up, as just being real about it. They've got to toughen him up. As for the rest of their picks, I feel like Sheldrick Redwine is going to be a better player for them than Greedy, with the caveat of Greedy getting tougher. He, to me, was a very good value for them in the mid-fourth at safety. I think he could play free safety from day one. He won't have to because they've already got a free safety there whose contract, ironically, expires after 2019, so he's kind of a built-in option for 2020 for them. But he could probably challenge for the starting free safety spot as a rookie. I think he's got exceptional range. He's got ball skills. He's explosive, so he can close on those crossing routes underneath it. He's going to have to jump, assuming their system has jump calls in there, which I think it does, but they have a new defensive coordinator this year, so I'm not sure how they handle those cover 3 beaters, but anyway, it's besides the point. You could put him at free safety, and he's got the range and explosiveness you want. So I love that pick for them. The 2 linebackers they drafted, Sione Takitaki and Mac Wilson, they've already got a Will linebacker, so both of them are probably going to be competing either for the starting Sam job or for the backup Will job behind Kirksey. At the very least, I think they're going to be immediate special teams contributors, especially Mac Wilson, who A, went later than I expected him to, but B, Wilson was a standout special teamer at Alabama early in his career. So I think he can, at the very minimum, be a standout special teamer for Cleveland as well, because that was kind of where he made a name for himself at Alabama before he became a starting linebacker. So I like both of those picks for them. It was probably more of a BPA type situation. They didn't necessarily need outside linebacker, but if you want to improve special teams, outside linebacker is the way to go. So they took a kicker in the 5th round, a developmental tackle in the 6th, and a developmental corner in the 7th. I was totally fine with all of them. Forbes, I did not have a grade on because I couldn't get any Southeast Missouri State tape, as you might expect. The small school guys are a little bit hard to do. Donnie Lewis, I graded as a either a 7th or a priority free agent talent. They got him in the 7th. Totally okay with that value. So when I look at the Browns class as a whole, they got a high upside corner who could turn into a stud, provided, they kind of coach him up and bulk him up in the ways they need to. They got outside linebacker depth and immediate special teams contributors in Taki and Wilson. They got a free safety of the future in Redwine, who is a great value. They got kicking help. They got developmental tackle help, and they got developmental corner help. Overall, very solid class. The Browns were already arguably the most talented team in the division. At least to me, they were the most talented team in the division. And they did nothing in this draft that made me change that opinion. So, very, very solid class for them. Not overly flashy, unless you count the greedy pick, but still very much needed depth all the way around. So, good job by them. And then moving on to the last team in the AFC North, the Bengals. They had a really good draft last year, and I feel like they followed it up with a really good draft this year. I mocked them Jonah Williams in my mock draft last week, and they ended up taking Jonah Williams for the exact reason that I thought they would, which is nobody wants Bobby Hart to start for them at right tackle, if we're being honest. Williams, I think, can start from day one on the right-hand side across from Cordy Glenn, assuming Cordy gets to the season healthy, and he's going to be an immediate effective pass protector. He's not nasty in the run game, but he's got some grit to him, especially on those outside zone calls when he kind of pivots his hips around and really tries to bury people when he gets his hand in their chest. So I like him. He's a very, very solid player. Not overly big or athletic, but his technique is impeccable. I think he's going to be a 10-year starter for them. And he's probably the best offensive tackle they've drafted out of all of the offensive tackles they've drafted early in the last, 3 or 4 years ago. He's better than Aboye easily as a prospect, and he's better than Fisher as a prospect. So I think they finally found the right tackle they've been looking for probably half a decade now. So great pick by them. The Drew Sample pick in the second round, I feel like was a little bit of a reach. I did not have him graded as a second round talent, but there is upside there. There's a lot of upside there. I don't know if I would have made that pick. I think there was other tight ends on the board I would have gone with instead, like Jay Sternberger, but to each his own, I guess. It is a late second round pick, so it's not the worst thing in the world that they reached, but I feel like there was a better way for them to use that asset. The Jermaine Pratt pick early in the third, I also think was a little bit of a reach. Not by that much. I had him graded as like a late 3, early 4, so maybe only a reach by like one round. But they desperately needed linebacker help, and this was a very thin linebacker class. So I can understand why they did it, because they felt like the linebackers were going to go earlier because there's just not a lot of them. So the Pratt pick I can understand. I think he's going to be a productive player for them. He's got some safety in his background. He doesn't really move like a safety, but you can tell that he understands zone coverage concepts and in terms of where he's supposed to be to help out his DBs and kind of wall people off. He's a smart coverage defender, not necessarily an explosive coverage defender. So I do think he's going to be a solid Mike backer for them. Maybe play him at Sam or Will. He can kind of flex around in all 3 different spots, but to me, his best spot's probably Mike. So the Pratt pick I'm okay with. Again, a little bit of a reach, but not that bad. The Finley pick in the 4th round, I loved that one. I had Finley, I think, graded as my 31st overall player, just ahead of Drew Lock, who I think was at 32. I had him as my QB3. Again, not by much, but I had him as my QB3. I feel like he's essentially another Andy Dalton. I don't necessarily think he'll be better than Andy Dalton, but if I'm the Bengals and I want to save some money on a quarterback contract so I can go bring in some free agents at other positions of need, I feel like Finley, if you look to 2020 or maybe even mid-2019, can take over for Andy, give me the exact same productivity on offense, and then save me a whole bunch of money when I don't have to pay Andy going forward. So that to me was a sneaky pick, not necessarily to find like the slam dunk franchise quarterback of the future, but at the very least in a cap saving move. If they really don't want to pay Dalton and they want to use that money for something else, you can plug in Finley and I don't think you'll really lose anything. I think very highly of him as a prospect. I think he's got great ball placement, underrated athlete, not the best arm talent, but I think if you're looking for somebody who can just stand in the pocket and throw fades to AJ Green all day like Andy does, Finley can do the same thing. So that was a great value pick for them. The duo of Travion Williams and Rodney Anderson in the 6th round, I love that for running back depth for them. I think both of them were probably went about a round later than I expected them to. I thought Travion and Rodney would both be somewhere in the 5th round in terms of where they were taken, especially Travion. His tape was a lot better than a 6th round pick. So again, getting more depth behind Joe Mixon, great picks for them. The Rennell Wren pick, the defensive tackle out of Arizona State. I mean, he is an athlete. He I mean, good Lord. He is super explosive. He doesn't really know what he's doing yet, but just in terms of size, speed, explosiveness, I think that's a very intriguing prospect to develop behind Geno Atkins. And if he can put it all together and really master his leverage, master his hand placement, I think he can be a very productive player for them. So that was a little bit more of a lottery ticket kind of pick, but it can definitely pay off. The Michael Jordan pick, same kind of thing. He's very talented, developmental guard prospect. I think you can kind of use him as a depth or maybe like a depth swing guard as a rookie and then try to develop him to take over down the line. So I'm all aboard for that pick. And then the Deshaun Davis and Jordan Brown picks, to me, just scream special teams. Pretty much any linebacker and DB you take in the 6th and 7th round, they've got to be good special teams players. So they're going to make the team on special teams if they make it at all. But when I look at this class from a top-down view, you've got a starting right tackle for the next 10 years. You've got a potentially solid Mike linebacker in Jermaine Pratt. You've got a potential replacement for Andy Dalton, who, while not spectacular, can at least give you the same thing for $20 million less a year. You've got a developmental swing guard. You've got a developmental 3-technique tackle. You've got running back depth. You got special teams help. And then you have at the very least, a high upside tight end who maybe went too early, but still, if he hits his ceiling, could be a pretty productive player for you. So I'm a fan of this class overall. Do I think that the Bengals can compete for the AFC North this year? Probably not, because I feel like their division's a little bit of a meat grinder right now, and it would be tough to win for any team because there's a whole bunch of talent in the AFC North. It's not an easy division to win. And just when I look at the talent gap at some key positions between Cincinnati and Baltimore and Pittsburgh and Cleveland, and in the gap between a first-year inexperienced coach like Zach Taylor and potentially future Hall of Fame coaches like Mike Tomlin and John Harbaugh, like it's going to be an uphill battle for Cincinnati. I don't think they're going to be a bad team. I think they are going to win some games, and they're probably going to split some series with everybody else in their division, but it's hard for me to predict them as true playoff contenders right now. They could very easily surprise me, but I personally would put them as probably the 4th team in the AFC North. And with that being said, let's move on to the NFC South. We're going to start off with the Saints, who did not have a lot of picks because they went all in on last year's draft to try to get a ring, which, to be fair to them, almost worked. If it weren't for the refs missing a call, they probably would have gone to the Super Bowl, and in my opinion, they would have won the Super Bowl. And you could say, oh, well, the refs missed calls that favored the Saints too, yada, yada, yada. I get that, but let's be real. If that one particular call wasn't missed, the Saints would have gone to the Super Bowl. So I can understand their frustrations. But point being, they went all in on last year's draft trying to get a ring. It didn't work out, so they didn't have a lot of picks this year. But that being said, even though they didn't have a lot of picks this year, they still made pretty good use of the ones they did have. They only had 5 picks, starting in the 2nd round with Eric McCoy. They really needed a center, and they got one of the best ones in this class, arguably the 2nd best center in this class. I don't necessarily think they're going to run or at least be as successful in zone with McCoy because I don't think he's as quick as Unger, but I think he's a little bit more powerful than Unger, and I think he's got a little bit better anchor and pass protection. So it might affect their run scheme a little bit. They might have to do a little bit more power trap kind of stuff with him than be a pure zone team when they've got Kamara, who I think is a really good zone runner. They'll figure it out. I think if anybody can figure it out, it's Sean Payton. They'll have to tweak and adjust a little bit, but overall, I think their run game is going to be just fine. Even though Unger, to me, is one of the best run blocking centers of the last, 7-8 years. But anyway, they'll figure it out. The Chauncey Gardner-Johnson pick, who was their next selection in the 4th round, they had to wait a long time to get to him. That was really a good value. I feel like you can plug him in as like a nickel DB, not necessarily just a corner, not necessarily just a safety, but just a straight up nickel that when you see 11 personnel, you put him on the field, you put him in the slot. He can blitz, he's strong against the run, he's not afraid to tackle in space, he's excellent in coverage, he can play zone, he can play man, just a very versatile player, great leader in the locker room. I loved everything about that pick. I did not expect him to be there in the 4th round. So the fact that they got him that late was just tremendous value. They got Hampton 2 rounds later as even more safety depth. They already have a pretty good safety duo, but if either Williams or Bell gets hurt, they'll probably put him at free safety behind Williams. But if either one of them gets hurt, I think Hampton can make the team as a depth player for them. Alize Mack, tight end out of Notre Dame, and Caden Ellis, the linebacker out of Idaho. Again, I've said it multiple times, I'll say it again. 6th and 7th round, when you're taking linebackers and you're taking tight ends, that is the special teams coach. That is the guys that he's pounding the table saying, I need this guy in my coverage unit, I need this guy in my kickoff unit, please get him to me. And I think both of them are going to make or break their careers on special teams. So overall, this class, again, it's small, but they got a replacement for Unger that they desperately needed. They got a nickel DB, which their secondary, it's up and down. They've got some really great pieces in Lattimore. They didn't pick up the 5th-year option for Eli Apple, so maybe they could have used some more boundary corner help, but again, with only 5 picks, what can you do? So they got a nickel defender that I really liked. They got some special teams help. They got safety depth. For only having 5 picks, this was a pretty solid class for them. So they're still probably the best team in the division as long as Drew Brees is quarterback. I think they're still going to be the best team in the division. They've got talent at almost every position on offense and defense. They're still Super Bowl ready. The NFC South is not an easy division, so I'm not going to say that they're guaranteed to win it, but they're probably the best positioned team to win it. And this draft class did nothing to change my mind on that. So let's move on to the Falcons, who came in 2nd in the NFC South last year. And this is a very intriguing class. And I'll say this, I know some people in that front office, and for the last year, over the last year, since before last season started, I have been hearing defensive line, defensive line, defensive line. We need more defensive linemen. I was convinced that they were going to go defensive line. I penciled in Brian Burns. I was like, there's no way they're coming out of the 1st round without either a pass rusher or a run stopper or whoever the best DL on the board was. That's who I expected them to pick, and they took a guard. It totally blew my mind. But that being said, I don't think it was a bad pick. It was the unexpected pick, but I don't think it was a bad one. Lindstrom out of Boston College, and then also they took actually 2 offensive linemen in the 1st round. They took McGarry as well. They traded up for him with the Rams. It's an interesting shift in philosophy, but I don't think the values were bad. Lindstrom, to me, has a much higher value to zone teams than maybe power or gap scheme teams, and Atlanta is a zone team. Remember, in my mock draft, I had Lindstrom going, I think, at 18 to the Vikings, even though he was a little bit lower on my overall big board. I had him going at 18 because Minnesota's a zone team. In Atlanta, it's the same kind of thing. He's got more value to them because he's a very quick, not necessarily powerful, but very quick zone blocking guard who can reach block 3 techniques and wall off those running lanes for Devonta Freeman. You got McGarry, he's got more power than Lindstrom, but he's also got pretty good feet to kind of crank his hips around as a zone blocker. I think he can either expand the edge on inside zone or seal it on outside zone. And I think you put those 2 guys right next to each other at tackle and guard, and it really helps out your offense. Do they need defensive line more? In my opinion, yeah. But the actual, in a vacuum, the values that they got for those 2 picks are perfectly fine to me. I do have some questions about McGarry and pass protection. That's why I did not have him as a 1st round pick. But as a run blocker, these 2 picks to me are basically declaring we're going to run the ball a lot. We're going to be running inside zone and zone stretch a lot. And these 2 guys are going to make Matt Ryan's job easier. And that is a commendable strategy. Would I have built the defense? Again, yes, but there is nothing wrong with shoring up the offensive line. Every team could use help on the offensive line. No matter how good their line is, every team needs depth. Every team needs insurance. Every team needs to improve because there's not a lot of good offensive linemen in the league. So I will never bemoan a team for improving their trenches, whether it's offense or defense. I will never talk bad about a pick that's improving the trenches, because at the end of the day, the game is won and lost there. So I was perfectly fine with the value for Lindstrom. I was perfectly fine with McGarry. I think they're going to be excellent values for them. I think they're going to improve the offense. They're going to make Matt Ryan's job easier. And we're going to get back to that really explosive, ultra productive Falcons offense that we know and love. Is their defense still a dumpster fire? Yeah, probably. But at the very least, as long as they can put up some points, I feel like their defense being a dumpster fire might not be that big of an issue. You can really only fix one thing at a time, so you might as well fix the one thing that you kind of built your team around, which is your franchise quarterback. Moving on to the fourth round, because they didn't have any second or third round picks. The fourth round, they got Kendall Sheffield, who's a developmental corner out of Ohio State. He was probably the fastest player on a very fast Ohio State roster, so I think he's going to make a good developmental corner for them. Maybe you can play him a little bit in nickel, because I know they lost Brian Poole this past year, but he'll probably end up being more of an outside guy. The first defensive lineman they drafted wasn't until very late in the fourth round. Again, shocking to me, but they got a philosophy and they're sticking to it. That was John Kaminsky out of Charleston. I personally did not watch him because I couldn't get any Charleston tape, but some people out there thought that was a pretty good value, so I'll take their word for it. Then they got Jordan Miller, even more developmental corner depth in the late fifth, and then Marcus Green, probably more of a special teamer. He'll have to make the team as a gunner. They got him in the late sixth. So again, not a whole lot of picks to work with because they made that McGarry trade with the Rams, but they certainly have a philosophy, which is we're building around our quarterback and we're building around our run game, and the defense is going to have to take a back seat for a year. Is that what I expected? No, but I'm totally fine with it. I understand why they're doing it. And, if it's a big if they stay healthy, which is one of the biggest issues they had with their defense, if the football gods are kind to them and they stay healthy, and the offense, now that it's got kind of, infused with some more youthful talent on the offensive line, if the offense can get back to being even 80% of what it was in 2016, if they get lucky, they can still make a run. Like, in terms of starting talent, they can play with anyone. They are razor thin almost everywhere on this roster, but the starting talent is spectacular. Again, it's going to require a lot of things to break their way, injury-wise, schedule-wise. Like, it's going to take some dominoes to fall, but they can still play with anyone. Like, this is not a bad Falcons team at all. They were a better team than their record last year. They just got really unlucky with injuries. So it's possible they can still challenge the Saints for a division crown. I personally would still bet on New Orleans, but don't be shocked if Atlanta is a better team than you expect. They did a different philosophy than I expected, but I'm totally fine with it. So if I was a Falcons fan, I'd be fine with it too. Moving on now to the Panthers, who they took the player that I expected Atlanta to take. They got Brian Burns at 16th. I did not think he was going to be there at 16. Phenomenal pick by them. Super explosive. He's got great hip bend. He put on, a whole bunch of weight for the combine and carried that 250 pounds beautifully. Like, you really didn't see it slow him down at all. It was good, healthy weight. I think you can either play him standing up or with his hand in the dirt if you want to get a little bit more creative with your looks. He'll probably end up mostly with his hand in the dirt in Carolina, but still, he can do anything. So he's a very versatile player. You can move him all around the formation. He can rush off either edge. He's comfortable rushing left or right. Not everybody is, but Brian Burns is somebody who is comfortable rushing off either end. Just a very, very solid pick for them. Very high upside pass rusher. They got Greg Little in the second round. They took him high in the second round. A little bit of a reach for me. Maybe because they saw some tackles fly off the board. They saw Titus Howard go at 23. Maybe they figured we're not going to be able to get one. I would have preferred Bobby Evans, but again, that's just me. Greg Little, I think at the very least is a high upside play with his length and power. Personally, I don't know if I would put him at left tackle on day one, but they kind of might have to. We'll see how it goes. If they coach him up and improve his technique and hand placement, it can work. Again, I wouldn't have taken him high too, but considering positional importance and the run that they probably expected to happen, maybe they didn't expect a tackle to get there in round 3, even though Bobby Evans did, but that's besides the point. I can understand their thought process behind that pick. The Will Grier pick in late 3, I like that because, Cam, he's had some injury problems, obviously with the shoulder, and he's played through a lot. But if you have a quarterback like Grier, who I think is a very high upside passer, he's obviously not as athletic as Cam. Nobody is. But I think you can plug him in as a backup and potentially a spot starter if Cam's injury issues kind of creep back up, or maybe he's not ready for the start of the season. I think Grier is a very talented passer. He went later than I expected him to. I think he's going to be a high-tier backup in this league. Somebody who, maybe if he is starting in September, if Cam's not all the way back and they don't want to rush him back, and he gets a few wins and he shows himself to be a very competent passer, in a couple years, he could become a pretty valuable trade asset for them like Jimmy Garoppolo was for New England. So, obviously, I don't think he's going to be competing and taking Cam's job, but this is probably an investment for the future of maybe turning into a very high pick down the line if he ends up having to start some games and he performs well. Like, that's a pretty solid investment in my opinion. You're really only as good as your backup quarterback, as Philly proved a couple years ago, and you could do a hell of a lot worse for your backup than Will Grier. The Christian Miller pick 1 round later in the 4th, that one was really intriguing to me because he's very much a hot and cold pass rusher. One snap, he'll show burst and incredible bend, and he'll get around that corner and flip those hips, and you say, wow, okay, this dude looks like he's a top 50 pick, and then he won't do anything for 4 series, and for some reason his explosiveness looks like it's lacking, and he doesn't show the same bend, and it's kind of crazy how he looks like 2 different players from quarter to quarter. Either he's this crazy athlete that's getting around the corner, or he's somebody who's getting nowhere near the quarterback. I don't really have any explanation for it. I know he's got a pretty extensive injury history. Maybe that was playing into it a little bit, but I think for a 4th round pick, that's a pretty good value, and you just kind of hope that your coaches can get that great Christian Miller out of him and not the really bad Christian Miller. At the very least, if he can give you like 10 to 15 really good rush snaps a game, I think he's worth that pick. Will you get that out of him? I have no idea, but he's shown on tape that he can give you 10 to 15 really good rush snaps a game. So hopefully that's the Christian Miller we see in the pros. Jordan Scarlett in the 5th round, very sneaky running back pick for them. Perfect complement to Christian McCaffrey. I think you use Christian as your every down starter. He's going to be gassing the defense. He's going to be catching balls, running screens, running slants, put him in the slot, put him out wide, have him run go routes. I mean, he can do everything. He's a wide receiver and a running back. You can run power, you can run zone. He's going to gas defenses by moving all around and getting the ball 20 times a game. And then in the 4th quarter, after Christian McCaffrey running all over the field from sideline to sideline has the defense exhausted, now you're bringing in this big, strong power back in Jordan Scarlett who's just going to run over people. He's very similar to probably like a James Conner, where he's not super quick. He's got a little bit of quickness, but really his main asset is just lowering that shoulder and trucking people. And so I think he's going to be a really good 4th quarter closer for them as after Christian kind of sets up the pins and gasses the defense. Really good value for a 5th round pick. Then they got Terry Godwin and Dennis Daly again in the 6th and 7th round. Daly's a developmental tackle who honestly I think has a pretty good chance to win the swing tackle job for them. I know Carolina's got like 3 right tackles on the roster already, but I think he could probably compete at the very least for the swing tackle job, or maybe he's more of like a practice squad stash kind of guy because he's got some upside. So I don't know if I'd totally let him go. Godwin, same kind of thing. He's got some upside, so maybe he'll end up on the practice squad. I don't know if either one of them will make the final roster, but there's a chance. If they have a really good camp in preseason, there's a chance. On the whole, I'm a pretty big fan of this Panthers class. Obviously, the centerpiece is Brian Burns, who I did not expect to be there. He's going to be a great pass rusher for them as either left end or right end. I don't know where they're going to end up putting him, but he can play both, so very good pick there. Greg Little bit of a reach, but they needed a left tackle. They didn't think they were going to get one by the 3rd round, so I can understand why they did that. Grier, I think he's going to be a top-tier backup and potentially a future draft asset for them if they can trade him away and get some picks, a la Jimmy Garoppolo. Miller, high upside pass rusher. Scarlett, closer at running back. And then you got 2 potential practice squad guys in the 6th and 7th. So Really solid class for them. I think they did a good job. Moving on now to the Buccaneers to round out day 3 here. They went heavy on defense. I mean, I expected them to invest in the defense, but man, they used all but I think 2 picks on defense, and one of those picks was a kicker. So realistically, in terms of offense and defense, they used everything but 1 pick, a 6th round pick on Scott Miller, a wide receiver out of Bowling Green. Every other pick was defense. Let's start with Devin White. He was the pick for Tampa in pretty much every mock draft that I saw for probably about a month and a half. And he's a perfect fit for them. They needed linebacker help. He's a true sideline to sideline, either Mike or Will backer. I don't know if they'll keep Levante at Will and maybe put Devin at Mike. Either way would make sense. I think he's an immediate impact contributor. He's fantastic in coverage. He's got the upside to be, honestly, a future all-pro linebacker. There's some things they got to coach out of him. He's not the best tackler. His instincts could use a little bit of refinement, but there's very few linebackers I would want him to learn from more than Levante David. So I think that's a really good mentor for him. They've got a good coaching staff that I think can coach him up. So really, really great value there. In round 2 and 3, they just went DB on DB on DB. They got Sean Bunting and Jamal Dean in the early 2nd and late 3rd. 2 very high upside corners, exceptional athletes. They've got size to challenge big receivers on the outside. Dean's got some technical flaws to work on in terms of hand placement. Bunting, I think, was the better corner, so I'm happy they took him first. There were some corners that I had graded higher than them. I was very surprised they didn't take Amani Oruwariye and Julian Love, but in terms of upside, both Bunting and Dean might have better upside than both of them because they're both just freak athletes. So I understand why they went that direction. Again, I still would have taken Love and Oruwariye, but I understand why they took Bunting and Dean. It's not like they reached that bad. Especially Dean, I feel like he was valued as like a high 3rd round pick, and they got him in the late 3rd, so it was pretty good value for him. Mike Edwards, they also took in the late 3rd. Probably more of like a hybrid nickel kind of DB. I don't know if he's a pure safety or a pure corner, a little bit of both. So I think they'll probably have him compete with Hargreaves for the starting nickel spot, because Hargreaves really only has 1 more year to kind of prove himself before he's shipped out of town. So I think they brought him in for competition at nickel. Again, solid pick, totally okay with it. Anthony Nelson went probably 2 rounds later than I expected him to. He'll need to put on a little bit of weight to play 5 technique in that defense, but I think he can. I think his frame is so big that he can support that weight and get closer to 300 pounds rather than the 280 that he was playing in last year. Even if he was at 290 or 295, I would accept that, because he's just a big, long, strong, ideal 5 technique for that system. He can rush the passer a little bit, but really I want that length and power to stop the run inside. I think that was a really good value for them. They got Matt Gay, the kicker out of Utah. Tampa has the worst luck with kickers that I've seen in the league. Hopefully Gay works out for them. But knowing their luck of kickers, I feel like the football gods are just going to smite whoever is kicking off for Tampa. Fingers crossed for him. And then Terry Beckner, they got in the 7th round, another kind of rotational defensive tackle who has a chance to make the roster. I graded him as a day 3, like a late 6, early 7, and they got him in the top of the 7, so perfect value for him. He's got a chance to make that roster because they honestly need help pretty much everywhere on defense. So overall, very, very happy with this class for them. They addressed and attacked the need they had the most, which was they couldn't stop anybody. I have a little bit more confidence in their ability to do so going forward. I love the Devin White pick. I love the corner picks, even though, again, they didn't take the ones I would have. The fact that they still took players that were of proper value and they addressed a huge position of need, I'm totally fine with it. They brought in some nickel help. They brought in some 5 technique help. They brought in some nose tackle help. They finally got some help in the kicking game. Again, hopefully that one works out. And they got a depth wide receiver who can compete for maybe the wide receiver 4 job in Scott Miller. So very, very solid class for them. And overall, this NFC South is going to be very, very competitive. I still think the Saints are the best team in the division, but the Panthers and the Falcons have the talent to compete with them. And remember, it is odd year Panthers, which means it's their turn to be a dominant team. I know people don't believe in curses, but for whatever reason, odd year Panthers are absolutely fucking ridiculous. So if anybody's going to give the Saints a run for their money, it's going to be a healthy Cam Newton and those odd year Panthers. So that'll wrap it up for today. Thank you guys for sticking with me through this whole thing. Day 3 is now over, which means we've only got day 4 left, where we're going to be looking at the NFC West and the AFC East. Obviously, we're going to be dipping into those 2 Super Bowl contenders from last year, the Rams and the Patriots, and if I think they can get back there again in 2019 on the strengths of their draft classes. So hopefully you guys enjoy that. Stick around for tomorrow for those 2 divisions, and until then, later.